socialstudiesgames.us. This is Unit 6, Video 1. As always, these videos and notes are based on the AP US History Study Guide. If you want more in-depth and deeper knowledge of the topics, check out some of my supplemental videos. But for the most part, these videos will stick to the facts and stick to what's on the test and stay with the narrative. I can criticize the US government's diplomatic relations with American Indians, e.g. the Dawes Act, and be able to define, this is low-level blooms right here, define assimilation and reservation. What we're going to talk about is the exploration of the West, or the settling of the West, the Western frontier, the development of the West. The idea of the Wild West is kind of blown out of proportion. Sure, there is a Wild West, but it's mainly exaggerated. Gunslingers, Indians, that's not really happening. What was true and what has been exaggerated and has been taken to the extreme is the idea of cattle drives. That's the real cowboys. Those are the real vaqueros. So in Texas, you've got steer, oxen, or cow, whatever you want to say. In the East Coast at this time, you've got hungry people that need food. And then around Chicago, that's where you get your meat packing industry. You want to get the steer to Chicago than to the people on the East Coast. Fun fact, there are more steer in Texas than there are human beings today. Now, I don't know if that's true. Someone told me that, so I believe it, and I'm going to repeat it here. If that's on the test, then be careful because I'm not 100% sure on that one. It's really easy to get the meat, the steaks, the hamburgers from Chicago to the East Coast. You got railroads. And even from the Midwest to Chicago, you got railroads. But to get the Texas steer to the Midwest, you don't have railroads. That means you've got cattle drives. So the idea of the Wild West, it's exaggerated, the shootouts. The truth is, yeah, you had cowboys, but they really weren't shooting each other. Sure, they may have encountered some hostile tribes along the cattle trail, but for the most part, they were just blue-collar, hard-working cowboys. I think the TV show Rawhide gives you an example. I don't really know. I'm not that old, but if you are that old, you would have seen Rawhide and seen what it's like to be on a cattle drive. And it's just blue-collar work of getting these steer to the Midwest. And then eventually some dude invents barbed wire, and all of a sudden you can't just drive your cattle over someone's farm anymore. It's kind of crazy that you would just drive your cattle across some dude's farm and not think twice of it. Eventually the farmers got wise and they invented barbed wire. Why are we learning this? Well, it's in the AP guidelines and it could show up on the test. And I talk about this all the time. There are two options. I can throw out the stuff that's not important, and then it shows up on the test and you get mad. Or I teach you the stuff that's probably not important and you get mad. So it's okay. You get mad. Don't at me. You will at me. You'll get mad when I teach you something that you don't want to learn, and you'll get mad when hey, all this stuff, you didn't even talk about this stuff that's on the test. So there's some truth. They basically just exaggerated the little bit of truth, and you can see it in some of the movies. Movies are fun. What are the two reasons people migrate, or why are the two reasons people move? I'm going to talk about one of those reasons. The one that we're not going to talk about, which we've talked about in lessons before, and we'll talk about in later lessons, which you witness every single day, and that's that people move for freedom. They'll leave where they're living because they're being persecuted, or where they don't have freedom, to go to another place where they are more free, whether it's for religious freedom, where it's for freedom of speech, maybe it's the right to own weapons, whatever that freedom may be. Maybe they just want to wear tube tops all the time. What's a tube top? I don't even know. So one of the reasons people move is for personal freedoms. The other reason people move, think about that. What state is that? 3, 2, 1. Did you guess California? What does the yellow represent? 3, 2, 1. Did you say that's not yellow? That's gold. That represents the gold rush in 1848 into 1849. That's where we get the San Francisco 49ers. Americans moved west. They rushed to California because they found gold. And people who are poor don't want to be poor. I don't want to be poor. I don't want to be middle class. I want money. And so I move to where I can make money. So people move to California because they discovered gold and it would make their life better. A lot of people rushed. That's number 2. People move for freedom and for economic opportunity, or for JOBs, jobs, or just ways to make money. And so people moved to California. That's the reason people moved to America in the first place, because there was land, they could build a farm, and they could make a living. And it's the same reason people moved to America. Either people are moving here today because they're persecuted in their homeland, or their home country is a disaster and they're moving here as a refugee, or they're moving, which is usually the reason, for a job, for money, for the opportunity to make money. And even within the states, people move from state to state for money. You have an option. Do I live in the city or do I live in a rural community? Myself, as a teacher, if I move to a rural area, there may be one school, and that means one chance at getting a job. If I move to a city, there could be hundreds of schools. That means hundreds of chances. And it doesn't matter what sector of the economy you're in. If you're a baker, if you're a lawyer, if you work in advertising, it does not matter. There are more opportunities in cities. There are more opportunities in some states than in other states. That's why people migrate. That will be on your test. The trick is knowing the specific examples of why people move. People move from out of the country. They still do today to America. Here's an example. The Chinese moved to America to participate in the gold rush. Unfortunately, due to racism, they are excluded. Now, there is more to this story. You should check out some of my supplemental videos where I'll go more in depth and explain both sides of the story. And maybe it wasn't so bad. Yes, racism is terrible, but there's more to the Chinese experience than, oh, well, we're racist and we wouldn't let them participate. There's more to it. But again, this is basically just sticking to the AP guidelines, and what the AP guidelines will lead you to believe, and this is mainly true, is that because they were excluded, the Chinese sought other ways to benefit from America. They participated in the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. They were servants, and they participated in the garment industry. You can look at this, oh, woe is me, racism's bad. That's true. But also the Chinese made it work. And you can find more information about that in the supplemental video. What is this? Again, so in these videos, you can look at the negative view, or you can take the positive view, or you can look at them both, which is what I would encourage you to see, the good and the bad. This is history. It just is. If you want to look at positives and negatives, you can, but it just is. So what is that map? We can see that there are states shaded in black, and they slowly disappear as time goes on. In 1990, there are very few areas that are now covered in black. And if you look really closely, you'll find out that these are Indian reservations. So if we rewind the clock to about 1790-ish, the creation of, I don't even know if Kentucky is a state at this point. I think Kentucky, before Ohio becomes a state in around 1804, I believe Ohio officially becomes a state. Most of America was occupied by American Indians or Native Americans or First Nations people, however, whatever nomenclature you prefer. If we go all the way back there before European settlers, it was all American Indian. But right here, you can see that a lot American Indian, not very much American Indian. A lot of American Indian, not much American Indian in 1990. So if we're looking at the AP guidelines, in the plains, American Indians were originally farmers, and that will change. Cultures change for various reasons. You have changed. I have changed because of cell phones. My life is completely different because of computers. My life from when I was very young to how I live now, it's changed a lot. And the same thing with the American Indians living in the Great Plains out here. They were mainly farmers. They were separated. When you're a farmer, you don't really travel that much, at least as an American Indian farmer during this time. But then that will all change when the Spanish through the Southwest introduced horses and guns, and the Great Plains Indians change, a major cultural change, into warriors and hunters. And unfortunately, when you have horses, you can move around. And so the Sioux, whereas before may have not encountered the Chippewa, now with the horses, they're going to interact more often. And they may have issues about whose land belongs to whom. And when you give them guns, that makes the problem even worse. But for now, what you really just need to know is the Plains culture changes by the introduction of guns and horses by the Spanish. If we talk about the interaction between the American Indians and the European settlers, the real quick answer that you get in fourth grade is we took their land. That's fine. Understand that. If you want a deeper understanding of the interactions between American Indians and the white European American settlers, or you can even say the Spanish European settlers, there is more to it than what you're normally going to be taught. But if we just stick to the AP guidelines, we take their land, and we take their land mainly through treaties signed that over the years, the American Indians forfeit their land to the white settlers. And there is force involved. We need you to move west because we want to take their land. And if you have a problem with the use of the word we, get over it. So here's your quick story. The British show up and the American Indians are forced to move out of the 13 colonies. The British are kicked out by the Americans. As the American population grows, we then want more than the 13 colonies. We want the Midwest. We want Ohio. We want Kentucky. We want Michigan. We want Indiana. And so then we force the Indians west. And there are wars involved, and you'll have to go back to the earlier lessons in American history where we talk about the Ohio Wars. You can talk about the Trail of Tears. Force is involved, but also treaties are involved. We say, well, if you move this time, we'll give you this. And if you move this time, then we'll set this land aside for you here. And if we go to 1870, the American Indians have been forced out of all of this land and then have been set over here. This is the land that's set aside for the American Indians. This is the land that is reserved for the American Indians by 1870. These are U.S. states, and this is the land that we have signed over to them through treaties. And for the most part, we don't want that land. That land, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, this is land that we don't prefer. We don't see any real natural resources. We can't farm it. We don't know of any minerals there. You can have it, American Indians. Well, then John Deere invents the steel plow, and with the steel plow, we realize, that land where we can't grow anything, that dry soil that doesn't work. Well, if we take the steel plow and we till up the land, then we can find the nutrient-dense soil underneath, bring it up, and then we can actually farm. So then we decide, well, you know what, Indians, sorry, but actually we think we can use that land after all. And that reservation or that land that we set aside for you and your own separate nation, well, we're going to need that land after all. So sometimes inventions are not always the best. Well, I guess inventions are good, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. But at that moment, not very cool for the American Indians. We set that land aside, now it's all gone. From there to there. And actually remember, all of this land used to belong to the American Indians. It's gone. Now, again, if you want a deeper understanding of what really happens, there are other videos for that. But I'm giving you the pretty much strict by-the-book facts sticking to the AP guidelines. And that story is, we took their land. Sorry about that. Assimilation. Changing from an original culture to another, more widely accepted culture. Assimilation is another thing where in a supplemental video, I'll go into more in-depth detail and show you a conservative and a liberal view or a more nuanced approach to what assimilation is. This is going to be a more liberal approach to assimilation, which says assimilation is bad, whatever. So what we're telling the American Indians is you got to cut your hair, You've got to dress like Americans. You've got to speak English. You have to participate in our economy. You need to accept our religion. You need to accept our cultural beliefs. One man, one woman at this time. Those were the beliefs that were enforced into the American Indians. And there you can see an actual picture. A lot of times when I show this to students, it takes them a second to realize, wait a second, those are the same people? Yes. The three Lakota boys you see on the left are the same Lakota Sioux boys that we see on the right. That is assimilation. You have to dress like us. You need to sit like us. You need to be American. A lot of people hate this. And if you want to go into more detail, you check out the supplemental videos. But for the most part, this video is just teaching you the definition of what assimilation is, because you will see on the test. It is when you are forced to give up your culture to accept the more broad, widely accepted American culture. You got to get up every day and go to work. You got to make money to take care of your kids. You got to buy a house. You got to live at that house. You basically do the American thing. You can try to fight it, just like you right now saying, I'm not going to be like everybody else. I'm not going to be like you, Mr. Dietrich. I'm going to be my own person. I'm going to dress however I want. And if I don't want to get married, then I'm not going to get married. And if I don't want to go to college, and if I don't want to work a 9 to 5, then I'm not going to do it. I'm going to be my own person. I'm going to get a blue mohawk, and I'm going to be different. I'm going to have a YouTube channel, and I'm going to show you. Well, actually, you're actually becoming like everybody else, because everybody else has a YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel. If I have a YouTube channel, then you are assimilating by doing a YouTube channel. If you want to be different, then don't do a YouTube channel. So you can't do a YouTube channel, and you can't do these things, or else you are doing what everyone else is doing. See how that works? You have assimilated, and you didn't even know it. You're just like everybody else. You are a clone like me. So for the early part of American history, we are signing treaties and working out agreements saying, look, you can have this land. We'll set this land aside. You can have your own country. You can have your own rights. Eventually, America reaches the point of, you know what? You are not a separate nation. You are not any different. You are on America. That makes you American. We are not signing treaties with you anymore like you are some separate nation. This is not the US and England. This is not us dealing with France. This is not us dealing with Mexico. You're on our land. You're American. Americans don't sign treaties with America. No more treaties. No more land being set aside. We're tired of going through this, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, America's acting like this is such a hassle for them when they're just taking land. So the Dawes Act is passed, and an act is a law. What does the Dawes Act say? It says two big things. No more reservations. We're not setting land aside anymore for the American Indians. And two, you got to assimilate. You got to be like us. You got to dress like us. You got to believe in us. You got to believe in our Constitution. You got to believe in our economic practices. You can't just roam around the West and do whatever you want. You got to be like us. You have to assimilate. This was the law. No more reservations. And you have to assimilate. This was the law moving forward. Here's a political cartoon that shows the Dawes Act. Typically, political cartoons, either they're funny or extremely negative, but the point is they get the message across without having to write paragraph after paragraph. You can see that's Dawes, and he is chomping away at the American Indian lands, taking their land. Basically, what we've done is by saying no more reservations, we're basically saying you don't get any land anymore. All this land is ours. So how do nations resolve disputes? And I kind of talked about this before. You can do it peacefully by signing treaties, nonviolent agreements. Like, okay, we agree to this land and you agree to that land, and we shake hands and we're all the better for it. Or we can just kill each other. And unfortunately, this is the way that throughout the history of mankind, most disputes have been settled. If you look at all the countries around the world, those countries didn't just get there magically. If you look at Europe, those lines that separate the countries, they didn't just appear magically. Now, some lines appear through geographical features because of mountains and oceans and rivers. But even then, a lot of those lines become permanent in every country around the world through violence. I hate to say it, but how did America get here if not through the Revolutionary War, through the Civil War, through the Mexican-American War, the War of 1812? These lines that settle our country were settled through blood. And that is every country around the world. Fortunately, today, most of the lines on the map are settled, and we no longer kill each other to decide where the lines will be. But it's naive to think that we're not still killing each other and writing lines. You can look to the Middle West. You can look to the Mideast, and you can look to Northern Africa today, that we are still deciding where these lines will be. And there are still disputes and fights over them. You can look at North Korea and South Korea. They're not fighting yet, but they're always on the verge of bloodshed, deciding where these lines will be. So war, unfortunately, is the most common way throughout history of resolving disputes. Fortunately, today, diplomacy or peace talks or nonviolent agreements are the ways in which we settle our disputes between nations. We're going to go over a more violent time in American history where it's almost always been this way, that the American Indians have had their land taken away, not necessarily through all-out war, but definitely through violence. These states, these areas were lost through violence. And now we're going to go through the final chapter of American Indians really having a prominent role or owning large parts of this country. And these are all going to be violent episodes, and there is no way to sugarcoat it. The Sand Creek Massacre will be the first in our chronological exploration of the American government taking land from the American Indians. So this is Denver, Colorado. And down the road, we'll find Sand Creek and how this basically works. 1864, the American military decides they want this land, and they slaughter 400 American Indians, 2/3 of which were American women and children. That's it. There's no way of sugarcoating this. This is just outright violence. This is stealing land. There aren't two sides to this story. There aren't two sides to most of the stories that I'm going to tell you. There is just one side, and it is through violence that America steals land from the American Indians. You can try to tell some, like, I'm not going to go into any conservative spin. This is just the way it is. The land is taken, and you can see some of these documents, picture accounts of what took place at Sand Creek. The Battle of Little Bighorn. This is one which was spun as General, for the longest time, General Custer was a hero for fighting to defend America against the American Indians, and the Americans were seen as heroes. Unfortunately, that's just not really what happened. What happened was we find gold in the Black Hills of South Dakota. We want to take that gold. Unfortunately, that gold is on land where American Indians live. And so General Custer wants to take that land from the American Indians so that they can get the gold and be rich. General Custer is warned, dude, don't go out there. There are more American Indians than you think are out there. And if you go up on their land, they're going to kill you. Do not attack them. There are more of them than you think, Custer. He was warned. He does not believe them. He goes into the area and he is defeated because there were more American Indians defending their land, right? The American Indians are defending their land. They are not the aggressors. The aggressor is General George Custer, and he dies because he foolishly goes to battle. Unfortunately for the American Indians, this is just one of the battles. More soldiers are going to eventually come in and wipe out the American Indians in this area. The Battle of Wounded Knee. Remember, now this is actually, probably call this a battle is incorrect. This is, again, more of a massacre. When you call it a battle, it infers that, oh, this was an even one side versus the other, or there was when we think of a battle, there's usually a reason for both sides to be involved. That's not really the case. So again, the Dawes Act says no more reservations. You must assimilate. The American Indians are trying to fight back against assimilation. They don't want to assimilate. They don't want to lose their culture. They don't want to lose their language. They don't want to lose their history. They want to preserve it. It's who they are. There's nothing violent. There's nothing bad about them wanting to preserve who they are. And so one of the ways in which the Indians, American Indians, I think this is the Lakota, are trying to preserve their culture is the ghost dance. The ghost dance is a religious dance in which they're trying to preserve their culture. Well, when the white people see this ghost dance, they freak out. They freak out. They're scared. Oh my gosh, they're doing this crazy ghost dance. This is terrible. It's scary. Someone needs to stop them. And so they use that as an excuse to go wipe them out, unfortunately. So this isn't really a battle. Again, this is just a massacre at Wounded Knee. And right there you will see what is a mass grave, where you dig a giant hole and you throw in a bunch of bodies. This is something we're used to seeing in other countries. This is something that we witness in World War II, or we see in communist Russia or communist China. We see in the Holocaust. We do not expect mass graves in America, but nonetheless, here you are, mass graves. This is genocide. Genocide is where one group is persecuted just for being different and are murdered. That is genocide, where you murder someone or a group of people because they are different. That's the vanilla version. That's not the textbook definition, but that's straight genocide. Wounded Knee Massacre. Probably not the Battle of Wounded Knee. Here you can see all the different examples of where the American government and American military just murder American Indians and take their land. No other way else of looking at this, folks. And here you will see the map of the Native Americans, and you will see through time in the top right, it slowly disappears until what you have today. The few present reservations. We'll watch it again, and you can see the American land slowly vanish before your eyes. And as that land disappears, sure, some of it was through treaties and some of it was passively given away, but a majority of that land was taken by force. There it is. There's what you got today. So your learning goals from this lesson. Can you criticize the U.S. government's diplomatic relations with the American Indians? How did we take their land? What did we do? Was it peaceful? Was it violent? Most specifically, the Dawes Act, in which we said, you know what? We're not going to set land aside for you anymore. We are not going to give you land in America. This is our country. You live here. Deal with it. No more reservations. And we also tell them, the American Indians, you must assimilate. You must become American. You must accept our Western values. So that's the definition of it. But can you criticize that? Can you say, well, what's wrong with that? Why don't you like that we're getting rid of the reservations? Why don't you like assimilation? Can you argue? Maybe you can argue for it. Maybe you can say it's a good deal. Can you make arguments with evidence? If you can, then you have mastered that standard. Last, can you define assimilation? Can you define reservations? I talked about other facts in the video, like barbed wire and cattle drives. That's there. Those could pop up in the test. But the bigger idea, the big picture stuff, and I talked about the gold rush and why people migrated. The biggest things I want you to understand is the relationship between the American Indians and the U.S. government. Can you describe it? Can you give examples? Can you defend the American government, or can you defend the American Indians? And can you give evidence that supports that defense? Assimilation, do you know the definition? That's where you are forced to abandon your culture, whether it's your language, the way that you dress, your religion, your beliefs, how you think life should be, your moral compass, and accept another cultures, or be forced to accept another cultures. For example, if you move to China today, could you assimilate? Could you start dressing more like the Chinese? Could you learn Chinese? Could you understand and believe in their cultural beliefs? Would you accept familial piety, where the family is important and your grandfather and your father, and you must do everything to show them absolute respect? Could you accept all their beliefs and their cultures? Reservations, that's the land that we had set aside for American Indians. There's a little bit of land today that is set aside. In North Carolina, we have Cherokee, North Carolina, and then Wyoming. There are several areas. There's area throughout the country, but very, very few spots, not much land left that we have set aside for the American Indians after the Dawes Act. That'll do it.